Before there was magic, before there was steel, before some mad deity dreamed up the idea of sharpening one rock against another and calling it a sword, there were fists. 2 of them, attached to the ends of arms, capable of ending arguments in a very direct and efficient manner. The fist is not elegant. It does not require a decade of monastic training or a blood pact with a dark patron. It requires the will to swing it and the constitution to take what comes back. The Pugilist is a Dungeons & Dragons class born from the grimy underground fighting pits of every city that has ever had a back alley. Designed by Benjamin Huffman and published under the sterling Vermin Adventuring Co banner on DM's Guild back in 2016, it fills a gap in the official class roster that players have been trying to jerry-rig with monks and fighters for years. It doesn't cast spells, it doesn't commune with nature. It does not spend its mornings in a monastery meditating on the sound of one hand clapping. It spends the mornings rubbing horse liniment on its knuckles, swearing at the bruise on its left eye, and eating whatever protein it can afford, which is usually not much. This guide covers the full lore of the Pugilist class, who they are, where they came from, how they fight, what they carry into the adventuring world, and what separates them from every other person in the party who hits things for a living. The fighter is a soldier, the barbarian is a force of nature, the monk is a spiritual practitioner, the pugilist is the person who walked into the wrong bar on the wrong night, got their nose broken, learned from it, and came back the next week ready to break something else. Every D&D setting has a bottom rung, beneath the royal courts, beneath the merchant guilds, beneath even the standard adventuring underclass that populates every tavern. There's a stratum of people who survive by virtue of their willingness to absorb punishment and dish it back out. Dock workers, pit fighters, caravan guards who lost their caravan. Soldiers who survived wars only to find that peacetime has very little to offer people who don't know how to make a fist correctly. Criminals who needed to make examples of rivals. Former criminals who needed to stop other criminals from making an example of them. This is where pugilists are born. The pugilist tradition lives in smoke-stained back rooms and underground pits lit by cheap torches, in the circles drawn in sawdust on tavern floors where 2 people step in and only one walks out without help. It's a tradition passed down by demonstration rather than instruction. You watch enough fights, you get into enough fights, and one day you realize you have a system. It probably looks like chaos to anyone watching, but you know exactly what you're doing. Benjamin Huffman put it plainly in the original class text. You can teach someone how to fight, but you can never teach someone how to be a pugilist. The secret of mastering Moxie does not come from disciplined study or rigorous training. It comes from years of wanting and needing. Huffman was telling you who this class is for. People who had to build themselves. Fighters train under veterans, monks study under masters in monasteries, even barbarians, for all their raw fury, often come from warrior cultures with established traditions of combat. The pugilist is, more often than not, self-made. They learned by doing, specifically by getting hit a lot and figuring out how to hit back harder. A fighter who graduated from a war academy carries the academy with them, its reputation, its techniques, its alumni network. A pugilist carries nothing but what they built themselves. Nobody can take the training away because no institution owns it. The trade-off is that when things go wrong, there is no former master to call for advice. Just you, your fists, and whatever moxie you have left. Most pugilists would not have it in any other way. They earn their capability in a way most other classes simply do not. You've heard me mention Moxie a couple of times now, but what is Moxie? Every class in Dungeons & Dragons has a central resource. Spellcasters have spell slots, monks have ki. Fighters have action surge and second wind. The pugilist has Moxie, and the class is explicit about what it is and is not. Moxie is not an esoteric or mystical energy that flows through the multiverse. It's the result of determination forged over a lifetime of hardship with never say die attitude. No magic, no cosmic significance. Just the cold practical accumulation of hard experience, and what that experience produces in a person who survives it. Every bar fight survived, every pit match walked away from, every impossible situation that turned out to not be impossible after all. All of it accumulates into something the pugilist can call on in the moment. It is confidence beaten into shape by actual experience rather than inherited from a lucky birth or granted by divine intervention. When Huffman writes that every city in the worlds of D&D has its underground fighting rackets, he's describing the factory that produces pugilists. The wrong side of the tracks is where the class was made. At first level, the pugilist gets 2 core features. Fisticuffs governs unarmed combat, improving damage dice as the character levels, adding a bonus action unarmed strike each turn, and extending that damage scaling to improvised weapons. A pugilist fights with his fists, yes, but also with whatever's in reach. A bottle, a chair leg, a heavy door they just pulled off its hinges. The class treats improvised weapons as a natural extension of the style rather than a fallback, because formal training teaches you to rely on what you brought, while underground fighting teaches you to rely on what is there. Iron Chin is the class's unarmored defense equivalent. While wearing light or no armor and not carrying a shield, the pugilist's AC is calculated as 12 plus their constitution modifier, replacing the standard dexterity-based formula. The practical implication is that this class is designed around strength and constitution rather than dexterity. The pugilist gets hit sometimes because they're not built to avoid blows, but they are built to still be standing when the dust settles. The 2 versions of the class handle one key feature differently. In the DM's Guild version, Bloodied but Unbowed comes online at level 3. When the pugilist is driven to half their maximum hit points or below, they can use their reaction to gain temporary hit points equal to 3 times their pugilist level, and restore all their expended Moxie at once. The D&D Beyond version moves this to level 2 and updates the trigger to any incoming damage. The Moxie Restore activates sooner and more easily once per rest. The trigger differs by version, but getting hit hard enough refills the tank either way. A reviewer on DM's Guild put it about as cleanly as anyone has. Your superpower is getting the absolute hell knocked out of you, and it just makes you stronger. That is the whole ethos. Alongside Bloodied but Unbowed, Brace Up lets a pugilist spend Moxie for temporary hit points, a feature that also applies to the Dog and Hound companion when used. The D&D Beyond version also adds Swagger Streak at level 2, which lets the pugilist spend Moxie to attempt and succeed at a skill check. The same confidence that keeps him upright in a fight gets cashed in to nail a bluff, a climb, or persuasion. As the class advances, each new feature pushes in the same direction: absorb more, endure longer, and hit harder. Heavy Hitter lets the pugilist grapple or shove an opponent as part of a punch, turning a hit into a hit and a reposition simultaneously. Haymaker lets them call their shot and automatically deal maximum damage. In the DM's Guild version, the attack is made at disadvantage, so the called shot costs something. The D&D Beyond version replaced that with a Moxie cost, so a miss still burns the point. Either way, it tends to produce memorable moments at the table. Unbreakable at higher levels gives advantage on all physical saving throws and lets a pugilist spend Moxie to re-roll a failed one. By that level, the character has survived enough physical catastrophes that this just feels like an accurate representation of their body. At level 20, peak physical condition pushes strength and constitution beyond the normal maximum of 20. A lifetime of physical punishment and recovery has produced a body that operates outside normal parameters. The character also recovers from exhaustion faster than any other class, and heals after every short rest. By that point, the pugilist is less a person who got into street fights, and more a person that street fights made into something that street fights can no longer meaningfully threaten. The class ships with 3 purpose-built weapons: brass knuckles for bludgeoning, the Katar, a push dagger style piercing weapon designed to be punched with rather than stabbed, and knuckle knives for slashing. All 3 are simple melee weapons with the light and unarmed properties, scaling with the pugilist's fisticuffs damage rather than sitting as standalone damage numbers. The DM's Guild release also includes over 20 magic items scaled to what a bare-knuckle brawler actually needs. Enchanted inks for tattoos, magical versions of all 3 weapons, and a magic item called the Club of Unconsciousness, which is either the best named item in the game or a very strong contender for it. 4 NPC stat blocks round the supplement out, giving DMs ready-made pugilist characters to use as allies, rivals, or straight-up bosses. The pugilist calls its subclasses fight clubs, and the framing is itself a piece of lore. A fight club is not a school with a curriculum or an order with a hierarchy. It's a philosophy, sometimes formalized into a loose organization, sometimes just a way of approaching the problem of how to hurt someone effectively. Pugilists often belong to fight clubs informally. They learned their style from someone who fought that way, or they developed their approach through experience and only later found out it had a name. The original 2016 DM's Guild release launched with 6 fight clubs: Arena Royale, Bloodhound Bruisers, Dog and Hound, Piss and Vinegar, the Squared Circle, and the Sweet Science. Hand of Dread was not in that first release. It was added in a later update and is now part of the standard DM's Guild version. The D&D Beyond version updated for the 2024 rules carries 6 fight clubs of its own, but it's not the same 6. Arena Royale and Bloodhound Bruisers did not make the D&D Beyond cut. The D&D Beyond version adds 1 new fight club not available anywhere else, the Street Saint. What follows covers all of them. The Sweet Science. The Sweet Science is the most technically sophisticated of the pugilist traditions. These are classic boxers and street fighters built around the knockout blow. Fighters who have studied combat the way a jeweler studies gemstones. Not just the broad strokes, but the angles, the timing, the way a body is balanced, and where that balance can be disrupted. The name comes from an old description of boxing as brutal and at its highest levels oddly beautiful in its precision. The Sweet Science fighter does not throw wild haymakers and hope one connects. They've already decided where they're going to hit you before you have finished deciding to throw your punch. Everything else in the fight is positioning, creating the opening for that decisive strike. The identity is fully present from level 3 rather than spreading across the first 10 levels, which is part of why it tends to be the first recommendation for players new to the class. If the base pugilist is the idea of the fist fighter, the Sweet Science is that idea fully realized and optimized. Piss and Vinegar. The name tells you almost everything. This is the style of someone who's genuinely unreasonably angry and has figured out how to make that productive in combat. Piss and Vinegar fighters are dirty fighters. Their pride is in their ability to provoke opponents into attacking, to get under their skin and keep them there until the irritation costs them a fight they might otherwise have won. It is less a philosophy of technique and more a philosophy of psychological warfare conducted at extremely close range. Where the Sweet Science is about composure and precision, Piss and Vinegar is about controlled chaos. Controlled on the pugilist end, chaos on the opponent's. The goal is not just to hurt the opponent physically, but to get inside their head until they make a mistake they would not otherwise make, and then make them pay for it hard. Fighters who came up in this tradition usually did so because controlled technical fighting was a luxury they cannot afford. People who grew up having to defend themselves and learned that hesitation costs you. The chip on the shoulder is a permanent feature, and they have made it into a weapon. The Squared Circle. The Squared Circle is the grappling tradition, MMA-style fighters who specialize in clinch work, takedowns, and submission holds. Where most of the other fight clubs are built around standing exchanges, the Squared Circle practitioner is constantly looking to close the distance, get their arms around you, and put you somewhere you cannot get back up from. Their skill set is frustrating to fight in the open field and absolutely punishing in enclosed spaces, which covers most of where adventurers end up fighting. The Squared Circle fighter treats combat as a puzzle of positioning and control rather than an exchange of blows. Getting their hands on the opponent is step 1. Putting the opponent somewhere they cannot easily stand back up is step 2. Everything after that is patience. They tend towards methodical personalities. People who've learned that the fighter who commits too early loses, and that controlling the range is more important than landing the first hit. Dog and Hound. Dog and Hound is the one fight club that does not put the pugilist in the ring alone. Where every other tradition is built around the individual, Dog and Hound is built around a different kind of fight entirely. The pugilist and their canine companion as a unit. The class text is direct about what drives this. You've never had a friend you can rely on who walks on 2 legs. Lucky for you, you've got the best 4-legged friend a body could ask for. The Hound is not a pet or a sidekick. It's a partner with its own stat block, its own hit points, and a direct mechanical link to the pugilist Moxie. When the pugilist uses Brace Up for temporary hit points, the Hound gets them too. Dog and Hound characters usually have a story behind the partnership. Former pit fighters who got their dog out of the same bad situation they got themselves out of. Wanderers who found a stray at the worst point of their life and kept it. The fighting style, built around mutual cover and combined pressure, requires coordination that only comes from time spent together, which is why the dog's backstory tends to be as important as the fighter's when building the character. Hand of Dread. Hand of Dread was added to the DM's Guild version after the original 2016 release and represents the darker corner of the Pugilist world. Fighters who have reached for something beyond grit and found dark powers willing to answer. It puts the Pugilist in a space closer to the Warlock than any other traditions, drawing on eldritch invocations and dread-powered abilities that make its combat feel fundamentally different from the purely physical styles of the other fight clubs. The Hand of Dread is the outlier in the class lineup. Most pugilists are self-made through stubbornness and hard work. The Hand of Dread made a different kind of deal. Same rough background, same chip on the shoulder, same refusal to stay down. But somewhere along the way, something offered them a shortcut and they took it. Whether that was a smart choice is a question the character's probably still working through. The Street Saint, D&D Beyond exclusive. The Street Saint is the fight club added exclusively to the D&D Beyond release, and it covers ground the original 6 did not touch. The class text, pugilists rise above the adversity they face. Those known as Street Saints do so with the aid of their deep and abiding faith in the gods. These pugilists have had their convictions tested and come out the other side with their righteous resolve only strengthened. They fight to make the world a better place. They fight because wherever corruption is allowed to exist, justice cannot flourish. Mechanically, the Street Saint is the closest the pugilist class gets to a divine caster. Channel divinity, fists of faith for radiant damage, and a scaled down lay on hands pull. The divine features are restrained compared to a paladin's. The Street Saint is not a holy warrior trained and ordained by a religious institution. They're someone who came up through the same streets and pits as every other pugilist, but whose faith held when everything else was taken from them. The gods did not come looking for the Street Saint. The Street Saint kept praying until the gods had to notice. Arena Royale and Bloodhound Bruisers, DM's Guild only. 2 fight clubs from the original 2016 DM's Guild release did not make it into the D&D Beyond version. Arena Royale and the Bloodhound Bruisers. Both remain available in the DM's Guild release, which is still the version to get if either of these traditions is what drew you to the class. Arena Royale is where the pugilist tradition meets professional spectacle. High-flying luchadors and theatrical wrestlers who blend showmanship with real fighting ability. The theatrics are not a substitute for skill. These fighters work crowds tactically, understanding that a fight whose audience is turned against you is a fight you're already losing, even if the hit points say otherwise. They thrive in cities with established fighting entertainment cultures and treat every fight as a story being told in real time, with the crowd as both audience and weapon. Bloodhound Bruisers are urban defenders, and the name refers to their observational skills rather than their ability to run someone down. They're notorious for looking for trouble and finding it every time, with a talent for reading character and physical evidence that borders on the supernatural, an almost preternatural connection to the cities they live in. Their skills lean towards insight, investigation, and perception. Most use this to protect the communities around them. Some lend their talents to less savory organizations because the philosophy does not dictate the morality. The pugilist versus everyone else. Why the pugilist is not the monk. This comparison comes up every time the class is discussed. The 2 classes serve completely different narrative functions even though they both punch things. The monk is a spiritual practitioner. Their unarmed combat is the physical expression of an internal philosophical and metaphysical discipline. Ki is not Moxie. Ki is a real metaphysical force in the D&D cosmology. It flows through all living things. The monk has trained to perceive and direct it, and the combat applications are a byproduct of the deeper practice. When a monk punches something hard enough to knock their soul sideways, there's actual metaphysics happening. The pugilist has none of that. Moxie's not magical. It is very earthly accumulation of hard-won experience and the focused application of willpower. When a pugilist punches someone hard enough to knock their soul sideways, what is happening is that someone with a very well-trained fist hits them precisely in a place the body does not enjoy being hit. The character arc does not run through enlightenment. It runs through experience, failure, adaptation, and the gradual building of a self that has been tested enough times to trust itself. The monk's journey is inward. The pugilist's journey is outward, through the world, absorbing what the world throws at them. Mechanically, the gap is just as wide. The monk wants to avoid damage when possible. Their ki is precious, and managing it carefully is much of the class's skill expression. The pugilist, through bloodied but unbowed, actually benefits from getting hit in specific ways. Taking damage is a resource trigger, not a pure setback. Playing a monk well often means staying mobile and clean. Playing a pugilist well often means standing in a bad spot on purpose and daring the enemy to do something about it. A monk and a pugilist look alike from the back of the room. At the table, they play nothing alike. Why the pugilist is not the fighter. Fighters come from martial traditions, military cultures, training academies, knightly orders, mercenary companies with professional standards and hierarchies. They're students of war in a broad sense, which is why they can pick up any weapon and become competent with it. Why they understand tactics and battlefield command. Why their abilities scale with disciplined study that has curriculum behind it. Huffman has spoken about this directly. The pugilist cannot work as a fighter subclass because a fighter uses a greatsword for the first 2 levels, and then puts it down to punch, which makes no sense in either direction. The pugilist operates as an individual in spaces that former military training does not account for, against opponents who are frequently as outside the rules as they are. A fighter with the Battlemaster archetype has a disciplined system of maneuvers that works across a range of weapons and situations. The pugilist system works with their body and is optimized for the specific, messy, up-close kind of violence that underground fighting generates. A context the military academy never trained anyone for. Why the pugilist is not the barbarian. The barbarian's combat identity is tied to abandoning control, to the primal surge that comes when the rational overlay on a person gets stripped away and something older and fiercer takes over. Rage is powerful precisely because it bypasses the limitations that careful thought imposes on the body. The pugilist moves in the opposite direction. Moxie is control sharpened to a point. Under pressure, a pugilist does not become less disciplined, they become more focused, more present in the specific technical challenge of the fight in front of them. Where the barbarian's power comes from letting go, the pugilist's power comes from holding on, to their technique, to their composure, to the accumulated lessons of every fight they've survived. Run them together in a party and neither one fully understands the other. The barbarian thinks the pugilist is overthinking it. The pugilist thinks the barbarian is throwing away the only real advantage you have in a fight. They're both getting the job done, which makes the disagreement genuinely funny and occasionally dangerous. The world the pugilist inhabits. Every significant city in a D&D setting has an economy of violence running beneath its official surface. Pit fighting, bare-knuckle boxing circuits, staged matches, and unsanctioned brawls. Gambling on fights, which means money, which means organization, which means everyone from neighborhood bookmakers to serious criminal enterprises has a stake in who wins and how. The class text acknowledges this directly. Every city in the worlds of D&D has its underground fighting rackets, and the pugilist came up through them. The pugilist navigates this economy with the expertise of someone who has lived inside it. They know the promoters, the ones who pay fairly and the ones who do not. The ones who run clean matches and the ones who have already decided the outcome before the fighters enter. They know the gamblers, the fixers, the trainers who are actually scouts for someone higher up the chain. They know which neighborhoods have the best underground circuits and which have the kind where you might not walk out. A fighter's military background might get them audience with a city garrison commander. The pugilist's background might get them into a room with the actual power structure in the lower city, which is sometimes more valuable and frequently more dangerous to offend. Most pugilists come from the lower end of the social spectrum, and this shapes their relationships with the adventuring world. They have a different relationship with authority than characters who came from comfortable origins. Not necessarily a hostile one, but a realistic one. They've seen how power actually functions at street level. Not the idealized version in civic stories, but the practical version where the rules get applied differently depending on who's asking and who's answering. Pugilists tend to be unsentimental about institutions. They do not assume that the law protects people equally, because they've watched it fail to do that consistently. Many pugilists care deeply about justice, but justice in that personal, immediate sense of protecting people they care about, rather than the abstract sense of trusting a system to work. In an adventure where the party is starting to suspect the power structure they're working within is rotten, the pugilist will not be the last one to figure it out. What drives a pugilist to adventure? The class text lays out the most common catalysts. For some pugilists, adventuring is the only way out of whatever miserable situation they've been stuck in since infancy. For others, it's an escape from a tangled web of debt or enemies they've piled up. Some fight because it's the only thing they know how to do, and adventuring is where the work is. The debt angle is particularly common and worth developing at the table. Money moves through the underground fighting world in many ways that are rarely clean. A promoter who fronts your training costs is also a promoter who owns a piece of your career, and the interest on that arrangement compounds faster than the fight purses do. Getting clear of that debt sometimes requires taking jobs that are too dangerous or too outside the law for the person who hired you to want to be associated with them publicly. Adventuring fits that description perfectly. Some pugilists left the circuit because they won one time too many and made enemies of the people who bet against them. Some left because they lost, beaten badly enough that the world which defined their life suddenly did not want them anymore, and they had to figure out what they were outside of it. A smaller number left because they found the pit too small. They had gone as far as the underground fighting world could take them and realized there were harder fights outside it. The last kind tends to be the most dangerous at the table, because they've already proven themselves capable of surviving things that broke most of the people they started alongside. Playing a pugilist. The temptation when playing a brawler is to be aggressive or combative in social interactions as well as combat, which you should resist. Experienced fighters often develop extraordinary patience outside of physical confrontations, precisely because they know exactly what a real conflict looks like, and most verbal disputes are not it. The pugilist might be the person at the table who sizes up NPCs with frightening accuracy, because they've been reading people's threat levels their whole career. They might be the voice of pragmatism when the other party members are debating the elegant solution. Not because they lack creativity, but because they've been in enough situations where the plan stopped being the plan to have stopped falling in love with plans. The class's working class background has table implications beyond combat. The pugilist notices things that more comfortable characters walk past. Who in this room looks like they have not eaten recently? Which guard is distracted because they're worried about something at home? What the actual power dynamic is at a social situation, which is presenting itself as something more polished. People who have spent their lives watching for threats read rooms differently than people who have spent their lives being comfortable in them. Treat Moxie as an actual character resource rather than just a number on a sheet. When your Moxie runs low in a fight, that should mean something in the narrative. The pugilist is tired. The certainty that has gotten them through is fraying. The accumulated damage is starting to add up to something that focus alone cannot compensate for. Playing those moments rather than just tracking the dice makes the class feel alive in a way that pure mechanical optimization never quite achieves. Conversely, a pugilist at full Moxie is completely present, reading the fight at a higher level than anyone around them. The same situation that looks desperate to the rest of the party might look entirely manageable from where they're standing. Not because they're deluding themselves, but because they have information others lack about what is and is not survivable. Playing that confidence when it's warranted is the most satisfying part of the class. Most pugilists develop a personal code over the course of their career, not a moral philosophy handed down by anyone, but a set of rules they built themselves from hard experience. Things they will and will not do, lines that exist not because someone told them to, but because experience demonstrated what happens when they're crossed. Fighters who never stop when their opponent is down, promoters who fix matches, the kind of person who kicks someone when they're down just because they can. Most pugilists have encountered all of these and formed firm opinions. Think of it as the pugilist version of a paladin's oath, not holy and not universal, but personally held with real conviction. Some pugilists will do anything necessary and have code only around loyalty to specific people. Others have very precise rules about what they consider a fair fight versus what they consider murder, wearing the word fight as a costume. The characters who play best at the table are usually the ones where those lines have been tested before the campaign starts, where honoring them costs something real, and where the player knows exactly where they sit before the next test comes. Where to get the pugilist? The pugilist class is available in two main places, and they are meaningfully different products. The original DM's Guild version, Benjamin Huffman's 2016 release under Sterling Vermin Adventuring Co., received class and subclass adjustments multiple times, most recently when the 2022 Ultimate Adventurer's Handbook released. The standalone DM's Guild product includes the 6 original fight clubs plus Hand of Dread, which was added in a later update. It's written for the 2014 rule set and retails for $9.95. Buyers who want 4 additional fight clubs, including a gunslinger hybrid and other expanded options, can find them in the Ultimate Adventurer's Handbook, which is a separate Sterling Vermin sourcebook on DM's Guild. A free trial version of the base class is also available on DM's Guild if you want to look before you buy. The D&D Beyond version landed in February 2026 as part of the platform's Partnered Content Initiative. It has been fully updated for the 2024 rules, integrates with the D&D Beyond character builder, and carries 6 fight clubs: Dog and Hound, Hand of Dread, Piss and Vinegar, Squared Circle, Sweet Science, and the exclusive Street Saint. It also includes the 3 weapons, 23 magic items, and 4 NPC stat blocks. It retails for $14.99. Arena Royale and Bloodhound Bruisers are not in the D&D Beyond version. If those 2 fight clubs are the draw, the DM's Guild release is the one to get. If you're on the 2024 rule set or want the Street Saint, the D&D Beyond version is the cleaner choice. The class has been played on Dimension 20's show Cloudward Ho, which is meaningful exposure for a third-party product built by a single designer entirely outside Wizard of the Coast development pipeline. Huffman receives a share of D&D Beyond sales, so either purchase supports him directly. The class has been one of the top-selling products on DM's Guild for years, and getting it onto D&D Beyond is a landmark that very few solo creators have managed. The official D&D class roster does not have a lot of room for the person who built themselves from nothing. Divine Favor, Magical Inheritance, Storied Bloodlines, these are everywhere in the class design space. The Pugilist fills a gap that has been there since the game started, and it does so without reaching for any of that. Benjamin Huffman built a class that makes the underground economy of every fantasy city feel real and narratively meaningful rather than just a flavor note in a backstory. The fighting pits that most D&D settings mention in passing and then ignore are for the Pugilist the whole world. Mechanically, it does something the official class roster still does not. Rewarding the Pugilist for taking damage rather than avoiding it is a genuinely different proposition, and the way Moxie feeds into a combat style built around the perseverance rather than efficiency creates a play experience that feels distinct from a fighter or a barbarian in practice, not just flavor text. If you want to play the person who walks into a fight with nothing but their fists and their nerve, who the rest of the party underestimates until the moment they absolutely should not, who carries the entire underground world of every city in their contact list and their scar tissue, that character has a class now. It's called the Pugilist. It takes the hit, and then it takes the next one.